today. And that has changed, and it's changed drastically, and it's changed quickly, and it's changed many times just over the course of the last week. It wasn't that long ago that we were having very reasonable conversations as to whether or not to host this, to host an on-site seminar. In a very short period of time, we've all come to realize that that's not a possibility today. And I don't tell you that just to tell you how crazy it's been behind the scenes, but I do tell it to you to frame that there is a lot of change right now, and we're going to talk to a lot of different topics today. We're talking about topics that changed as recently as last night. So what we talk about today will be our opinions, our feelings, our discussions. There'll be some black and white. There will be some gray, and things will change, and they will change again. We're going to spend the bulk, if not all of our time, talking about COVID-19 and its impact on insurance and risk management today. We'll table a lot of the other generic workers' compensation discussion for another day. I want everybody to know this as we get started too. These are our opinions. We're agents and we're brokers, and we don't make coverage decisions. That is not our role in the insurance world. We can make opinions or form opinions, and we can share those with you. But there's a lot of coverage decisions that will be made related to this virus, not just today, but in the coming weeks, months, and even years. Insurance companies will be making decisions, and ultimately court systems will be making decisions as people challenge the interpretation of language. So, I think with that, I think we all just need to go into this with eyes wide open and understand that tomorrow is going to be a different day than today. I've been opening these seminars and speaking at these seminars for many years, and we always talk about risk in our organizations as opposed to insurance. There's lots of traditional insurance products that cover lots of traditional insurance risks, but there's so many risks that we face organizationally that they're not covered by those traditional insurance policies. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time on that today. We're here to address a substantial risk that's going to have a lasting impact on all of our businesses. So it's we're going to talk not just about workers' comp and COVID-19. We're going to run this through a number of other insurance products and things that we need to be thinking about as business owners. As always, we want these sessions to be interactive. This is our first time doing this as a webinar. Frank does these all the time, so I'm going to let him address the interactive aspect of this. But we've got an inquisitive group. We always do. I am sure there's going to be plenty of Q&A today. Frank touched upon our presenters. Rich Volkmann is here with me. He runs the benefits practice here at FBinsure. Rich is going to be addressing COVID-19 and how it relates to health insurance. Talk about what our state and federal governments are doing right now and what we are expecting from them as well. Rich, over the last few days, has been working tirelessly with our clients in getting up to speed with all of this change, as early as this morning, trying to interpret law changes that were happening yesterday. And then we've got Frank Pennachio. Frank, many of you have seen Frank before. We first engaged with Frank about 17 years ago when he was running a workers' comp consulting organization. Over 17 years, Frank has become a friend, a mentor. He is certainly our workers' compensation guru here in the agency, and he is an integral part of our organization. And Frank and I are both going to be hitting on insurance issues and risk management issues that we all need to consider today and going forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Frank.
Thank you, Tom. And yes, as Tom mentioned, I was tweaking slides this morning due to things that were evolving overnight and hitting my email with different trade publications and the like. So this is one of the most dynamic situations I've ever experienced in my 30 plus years in the insurance industry, and we're going to look back on this as we change over the next several months, as Tom said, and beyond, and really see this as a transformative series of events and a transformative crisis. And I think we'll all be better for it once we come through it. But we're going to talk about some insurance and risk management issues and approaches. Tom's going to talk about the risks of a remote workforce. People have been told to go home. Tom's going to share some stories he's already having with his clients with respect to some of the risks that arise from the work-at-home workforce. Rich is going to come in to update the latest information as of this morning with respect to what's going on at the federal level as well as the state level around health insurance, disability insurance. It is highly likely that more health insurance is going to get tapped now, or going to get stressed than would typically be the case. And Rich is going to talk through some of those issues and what's happening. Tom's going to drill into this. Tom, why don't you take into the remote workforce and go ahead and dive right into that, because I would imagine we have folks on the call today that have people working at home as we speak.
Sure. And I don't think this is going to be a deep dive, but there's some coverage triggers that we all need to be thinking about that may result in deeper conversations with your agents or with us if we are your agent. But a few things to think about. Frank is going to address workers' comp as it relates to the virus itself. I'd like to address it really from the standpoint of employees working from home. And our organization is a perfect example of this. We have 110 employees. And as of this time last week, 100 of them were working across 12 of our offices, coming in every day, brick and mortar. And we had a handful working from home. Today, that's very different. We've got 100 people that are working from home and a handful of people that are still here, making sure we're getting the mail and distributing out information to the remainder of the organization. It's a very, very different world. So let's first think about, where did all those employees go? Well, we have employees that live in Rhode Island. And many of us could have employees that live in Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Hampshire. But we had an operation, for us, we're a little bit all over the place. But if you have an operation that's solely in Massachusetts and you have a policy that only covers your employees solely in Massachusetts, and now they are working elsewhere, that is something that needs to be considered. You need to be talking about that with your agent. In addition to that, we need to think about, are our employees actually covered while they're working from home? I had a conversation with a CFO of a 5,000 employee organization yesterday, and it was a little bit of a fun argument just because we have that type of relationship, but he does not want to be held responsible if one of his employees falls down the stairs getting a glass of water while they're in their home. But the reality is that as employers, we are responsible for their work environment, even when we have no control over it. So we will very likely be responsible for injuries that happen at home. We all in our organization received an email yesterday from an employee who had sent an employee of her new a photo of her new stand-up desk. It was a dining room table, and on top of that dining room table were 2 packages of toilet paper, and on top of that toilet paper was a laptop. And it was funny to see for all of us, but the risk manager in me looks at that and says, well, if that laptop falls off that toilet paper and breaks her foot, we're going to own that work comp claim. So, those are the things that we need to be thinking about. What if somebody does get up and go downstairs and get a glass of water? What if their house is a mess? Are we responsible? And yes, we are. As long as the injury happens arising out of and in the course of their employment, and they are working while they are at home, we would likely be responsible for those claims. So let's move on to cybersecurity. Those same 100 employees that went home to work, more than half of them have never worked from home before. Do you think we have some issues with that? Have they been trained? Do they know what to do from a security standpoint? Are they following any best practices? Do we have policies in place for all of this? We did, because we had a large percentage of our workforce that was able to work from home. But does everybody else have these types of policies? Do we have rollout procedures for these guidelines, for employee handbook procedures, for our manuals? We need to be thinking about that as business owners right now. We've got to start to think we got to pump that out, because we're not here to talk about the pandemic itself and how long this will last. But I know for us, we're thinking we're going to be working remotely for a little while. This isn't going to be a 3-week stint. What about the technology that they have? Are they working on our equipment, or are they working on their own equipment? Is the antivirus being updated? Are the connections secure? When we don't have control of that equipment, what potential problems could we face there? Your cybersecurity policy, if you have a cyber policy, some of them have exclusions in there. If we warranted through the application process that our equipment would be up to date and would be secure. But if we get a whole bunch of employees working from home on their own equipment, are we ensuring that that equipment is just as secure? Is it just as up to date with its antivirus? So just another thing that we all need to be considering right now. And for those of you who are in the same boat as us, who have sent a number of people home, make sure you're testing everything you're doing. Make sure you're training and retraining again. Deliver these procedures, deliver these guidelines to your teams, and over-communicate what they need to be doing. It's more important than ever right now. Let's move on to the property form. Property insurance, how does that come into play? Well, we had between $150,000 and $175,000 worth of equipment walk out of our office in the last 72 hours. Do we have coverage for that? Well, we've got coverage for our property when it's on site in our own buildings. We need to be thinking about, do we have coverage for our property off premises? These are conversations that you need to be having. And then finally, addressing the human resources side of this. Those same 100 employees went home. Most of them came to work every single day before that. And most of our managers manage those folks on site every single day across 12 different offices. Are you ready to manage a virtual workforce that you may not have managed before? And I think the answer for everybody on that is of course not. Nobody planned for this. Some organizations are more flexible than others. Some may have already been doing this, but for a lot of us and for a lot of our folks, this is all new. So, what do we need to be thinking about there? Well, excuse me. Same as on the cyber side, we need to be thinking about, the employee handbook policies, and rolling a policy out alone is not enough. We need to be thinking about, how are we leading our organizations? How are our teams working together? How are we leading those team leaders? Do we have clarity of what we want to do and how we want to do it right now? I mean, now more than ever, we need to be establishing, okay, this is the goal. This is what we need to be doing. What are the goals of our teams, our departments, our organizations, even the goals of our individual meetings? Let's provide clarity to our teams around that. Communication, and not just communication over communication, is going to be more important than ever. Firing off one email about a change in your organization today is not going to be enough. We need to be over communicating that, re-communicating that. And then finally, we need to be measuring and managing that communication and what we're doing, and making sure we're reinforcing what we're doing with our teams. To that end, we put a number of resources on our resource center. If you go to FBinsure.com, this is not meant to be a commercial, but if you do go to FBinsure.com, you will see a link right there on the homepage for our COVID-19 resource center. We have consolidated a great deal of the information that we are all getting from many angles today in one spot. We are putting things up and we're taking things down as they are changing. But some of the resources that we have put in there are safety resources, compliance resources. They are work from home policies that you guys can use. Go ahead, download them. They are available to everybody. And for our clients on the call, you get access to thousands more HR safety and compliance resources. So, feel free to get in touch with us and we will help you along the lines with that. And I think with that, Frank, I'm going to hand it back off to you.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent work, sir. And we're gonna dive in now to some questions. First and foremost, though, folks, there's a lot of false information out there. So let's be careful where we get our information. There's even scams that are floating around. So we're going to really work diligently. Tom and his team's going to work diligently to separate what's true, what's not true as we move through this. And there's these next several slides are fairly dense with some words on them, but we're not going to go too deep and get too hung up on it. We want to get the main ideas across. Is the coronavirus compensable under work comp? The answer, of course, is maybe, and that's changing day by day because various states, as you'll see momentarily, are essentially making decisions as to what the insurance policy is going to cover or not. Technically, what's supposed to happen in work comp when it comes to occupational diseases is that if there's a higher probability for someone to get an occupational disease like healthcare workers, it's more likely to be to be covered for them than someone who would not typically be exposed to that type of environment. A plumbing, heating, and air electrical person, they could get the coronavirus visiting someone's home or a commercial place, and that could be out of the course and scope of employment, but there's two tests that go to workers' compensation. One, is it out of the course and scope? And two, is it peculiar to that workplace? These two tests would qualify it under workers' compensation. Did it happen out of the course and scope? And were the conditions peculiar to the workforce? Because typically, to qualify for a work-related compensable claim, that doesn't happen if you catch the flu from a coworker. That doesn't happen if you catch a cold from a coworker. Now, there's a lot of issues here, and as Tom mentioned a few moments ago, we're going to be sorting these things out through state legislators and through the courts, probably for a long time to come. As an example, this just out: Pennsylvania, for all purposes, is saying to the state of Pennsylvania, work comp is state by state. So every state's going to make their own decisions on this, to go ahead and file a work comp claim if they get sick. They're going to call it an occupational disease claim, and they're just essentially broadening the compensability out of Pennsylvania. Michigan, expanding unemployment work comp benefits to those who get the virus. So once again, we're seeing another state. We're probably going to see more and more of these. And I'm a little bit surprised Massachusetts and Rhode Island haven't stepped up in this area, because they generally tend to pretty quickly. New Jersey is going to say, essentially, if you get the virus, you're eligible under work comp. If you can't go to work because of a greater risk of contracting it, you may be eligible for temporary disability insurance. And I think that's something Rich is going to talk about here shortly. In California, they're stepping in and saying if you get it, you can file a disability claim. Governor Gavin Newsom out there is even waiving the waiting period. So we're going to see more and more state legislators, and even Rich is going to talk about what's happening out of Washington, D.C. in just a few moments, and we'll just have to see what happens on a state-by-state basis. Stay close. The likelihood is, even though it is typically not the intent of workers' compensation to cover something like this, unless you're a healthcare worker or first responder, we may very well see in your state, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or anybody, Connecticut, whoever else is on the call today, we could see a broadening of the coverage. It just seems like it's something that is politically appropriate right now to do. In New York, expanding sick leave and disability payments to anybody in the workplace. And folks, I was updating these slides last night and this morning, because this just keeps coming out. It's coming like a fire hose right now, so we're going to have to stay close and stay on top of it. Next, we're going to pivot to business interruption coverage, because that is probably one of the biggest losses that employers are facing right now. I'm speaking to you from Florida. The bars and restaurants were closed here St. Patrick's Day night at 5 o'clock. And there's a lot of folks that are going to be really hurt by hospitality, in addition to all the bars and restaurants, and we could go on and on. Retail's getting hurt as well. And what does all that mean? Typically, you would not get a loss of business income coverage paid And I go back to what Tom's caveats too, folks. There's going to be a lot of interpretation around this, and I'll share with you what a restaurant in New Orleans just filed a claim. Unless there's property damage, typically we look at property damage and direct physical loss, and that's typically damage to your building, wind, fire, whatever the case may be. There was damage to your building, property damage that caused you to have to shut down. Those are the typical and usual triggers around whether or not, if you have business income coverage, that it would trigger that money to start to flow to you. We're going to be talking about this for a long time to come because we just don't know how this is going to be interpreted. The coronavirus, people are staying at home, they're not producing goods, people are not purchasing goods, but none of these are related to direct physical damage to your property, unless a judge says, as you'll see here momentarily, this is going to get litigated. But I think we want to at least put out there the intent of the business income, loss of business income insurance policy. The overall intent was to have direct physical damage, wind damage, hail damage, fire damage where you could not continue to operate. This could change it. A New Orleans restaurant has filed a claim for loss of business income coverage, and this is a quote from their attorney. It is clear that contamination of the insured premises by the coronavirus would be a direct physical loss, needing remediation to clean the surfaces. In other words, what this attorney is asserting, there will likely be many more, and this is going to be state by state again, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, that if there's a coronavirus in the building now has property damage. I don't know how that's going to play out. It's not our role to on this webinar here today to speak to it, other than we're going to push the limits of these policy forms. And what this also goes to is in addition, is to start looking at supply chains. So what if the insured can demonstrate? What if you can demonstrate that your property was damaged by the coronavirus? And there are typical exclusions in there. They may be a bacteria. There may be an actual virus exclusion. But we're going to talk about what's happening in the industry around that in a few moments. It could be considered contamination or pollution, much like mold or fungus. And you may actually have a policy that explicitly excludes virus damage arising out of. Let me pause there and see if Tom wants to jump in here so far. Tom, I hit a lot of stuff there. I don't want to get too bogged down on the density of these issues, but I also want to pause and let people breathe and take it in, let them have an opportunity to ask a question, and also to give you some space to jump in here.
Frank, I would reiterate, it's not our role here to determine whether or not this is going to become a covered cause of loss. If it were to become a covered cause of loss, and nearly every business in this country could now claim a business income claim, it would collapse the entire insurance industry. Maybe not the entire insurance industry, but anybody providing this particular coverage. So I think you'd be more likely to see the federal government step in if that were the case and provide some sort of TARP type situation where we're propping the industry back up, or maybe stepping out in front of it and with some sort of stimulus package. One man's opinion. There's plenty of them out there right now. It's going to be very interesting to see how these are litigated, and I think I alluded to it earlier that in a situation like this, I think we all want to know today, do I have coverage? Do I not have coverage? It's very likely that it's going to be years. If there is any sort of coverage available, it's going to take years to ferret out whether or not that will be the case.
Tom, that's well said. I think, would you agree, Tom, that it's at least fair for us to assert that when people purchase business interruption or business income coverage, that there was not an expectation on behalf of the insurance company, or probably even the insured, that it would pick up something like this, that the discussion is typically around if your building is damaged, if you can't operate your business because of a direct physical loss, a Hurricane Sandy, a bad fire, the case may be, that is the intent. That's the way those policies are priced, and that this is a whole new ball game. But coming out of the box, is it fair for us to assume or to assert that the original intent of the policy form was not to cover something as dramatic as a pandemic?
I think that's abundantly fair, Frank. I mean, to give some context on that, and you could probably tell stories as well. I've been doing this for 19 years and work with a lot of commercial businesses. In my 19 years, I've paid one business income claim. When you think about the way that product is priced, it is not priced for a one-time scenario where we're paying out massive amounts of dollars. The capacity of carriers to even pay those dollars does not exist. I do agree that is fair. Now, if I'm sitting in the insured seat, we may not all feel that way. We buy insurance and we expect we're going to be covered. But we often talk about, we're engaging in a contractual relationship where we have the potential opportunity for coverage. The words in those policies are important, and they will dictate whether or not we do. And absent that will be dictated by the court system.
And I think what this also does, Tom, and I'm not going to go too far down this path. We have some other content we certainly want to share with the participants today. But I think this may very well be a watershed moment to elevate the conversation between business owners, business leaders, and insurance professionals. That how frequently do we all hear, well, we do know this. We can't insure everything. We know that. And we know that we have to deal with risk as to either transfer it to an insurance company, preferably with intention and information, assume it, preferably with intention and information, or try to avoid it altogether. And I believe the pandemic is as horrible as it is and as bad as it's going to get. I think if we could start looking for a silver lining, we're going to elevate the conversation around risk. And there will be more pandemics. There will be other issues that this has never happened before are going to emerge, and we just want to help folks make intentional and informed decisions around risk, especially around risks that maybe we've never seen before, that we know are out there, and they continue to emerge, and we all carry a bias. Well, if nothing bad has happened in that space, the likelihood nothing bad is going to. I think this is going to wake us up, and I don't want to go too far down that path. I just want to put that out there. So, contingent business income is another issue. What if you have a main supplier that is now shut down and can't provide you either the raw materials or the goods, or if you're a contractor, maybe you can't get air conditioning units, maybe you can't get plumbing supplies, maybe you can't get copper wire, who knows? So we're going to have to look at this supply chain issue a whole lot more. What if you actually have goods that are, supposed to be heading on a ship over here from China, and you've had that big pause? I've read where pharmaceutical manufacturers rely heavily on some of their raw materials for pharmaceuticals from China, and we just don't know what impact is going to be. And This is something we're going to have to continue to look at. One of the questions that we often ask employers and business owners is, how do you make your money? And let's walk that back all the way to the source and make sure that we're going to help you protect your supply chain the best way possible. And I'm not going to go real deeply into that. I think you guys get the gist of it. Is what we're talking about is if your supply chain gets disrupted and you can't get your goods and services or raw materials, that is a separate issue. Maybe you're not adversely affected. Maybe you can still go out and do what you do. Maybe you can still manufacture what you do, keep your people, a certain safe distance apart in the workforce, and continue on. But if you can't get the goods, if you can't get the stuff you need, then that's a separate issue we want to talk about, and it can be exceedingly complex. There are a couple of insurance policy forms that there's an organization called the Insurance Services Office, and they put out copyrighted insurance forms, insurance policies, and they put them out into the world, and they say, here you go, insurance companies. Here they are. If you want to file them in your state and get them approved, we've written them for you, and you can maybe even change them if you want. You can use ours as a basis and then add to or take away. So the insurance services office, at the very least, is responding. This just, as you can see, this just came out a couple of weeks ago. Now, do I know of any insurance companies right now that are chomping at the bit to file these types of policy forms? I do not. It's way too early. But there will certainly, we're starting to see in the trade press, specialty insurance companies are starting to emerge with coverage. Not likely for this particular coronavirus pandemic. It'll be considered pre-existing, but for future pandemics. So we'll have to take a look at that. Civil authority is another big issue. If the city, the state shuts everything down, causes you to shut your business down, that's another whole risk issue. Tom, before I move on, anything about contingent business income or how the industry is responding, even though we don't know. I don't know of any companies right now that have filed. It's too early. These forms were just introduced a couple of weeks ago. But any thoughts about those two topics?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly on these insurance service offices forms, I think it's great that we are responding at this point. I think these will serve to be more of a limitation of coverage. If it's ever determined to be that we're going to cover coronavirus on these policy forms. And before we start a stampede of people to go out and endorse their policies with these, they have not even been issued ISO numbers yet, so they cannot be utilized on a policy form at this time. And besides that, it would be like trying to buy hurricane insurance when the hurricane's right offshore. Carriers are not going to be looking to provide coverage. But I think this is a great response. And at least it's acknowledging as an industry that this is something that we need to address. And there'll be more to come on this one. I think, this is something that would probably be more of a 2021 discussion with clients as opposed to a 2020, just based upon availability.
That's it. And I think we've kind of covered this. They're made available. They've not been approved as yet. We don't even know carriers are interested in getting them approved. The idea is to, really try to provide coverage here. Now, how's it going to be priced? We don't know. Could it also extend? We're also going to try to extend it to that contingent business income for your supply chain or for places of business that could be adversely affected, that could hurt your revenue stream, and all the loss of income is going to come into it as well. We're going to have to look at what it's likely not going to cover is of course, intentional action. That's excluded from just about every insurance policy. The cost to clean, dispose, disinfect, those types of things, the testing, and the loss or expense due to the fear of contagion, meaning when customers just don't show up at your premises because they're afraid of doing that. So fines and penalties, of course, are always left out as well. Supply chain is something we probably don't talk enough about. We may have hammered it a little bit too much this morning, but it's a conversation that we want to pay far more closer to. I think we've realized as a result of this, we are a global economy. We've known that intellectually. Now we're going to really learn it, likely with some discomfort with some businesses. And also there's been a trend over the past decade or more that supply chains have been honed down into one or two suppliers in order to get the best deal. There's a lot of the procurement departments have said, we'll give you all of our business if you sharpen up, reduce your margins, and we'll give you greater volume. As a result, though, it's put more stress on the supply chain because maybe there's only one or two suppliers out there, and when things go south, it's going to take a while to crank up additional suppliers. The big question right now, is this a black swan event? Meaning, is this an event that just will happen once in a lifetime? I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around that. Our CEO doesn't think it's going to be a black swan event, thinks that we're likely going to see more and more of this type of loss and other types of loss. And we're not going to go down any kind of path with respect to whether or not climate change will have a part in that. But we may or may not see with the permafrost melting, what is down below there, what kind of bacteria or viruses might get let loose into the atmosphere. Is this black swan? We don't know. but I think it's worthy of the conversation. My sense tells me this is not a one-time thing. Before the people on this phone's careers are over, we will likely see something else along these lines. Tom, anything you'd like to add to that? Is this a black swan event, Tom, or that this is it, once in a lifetime, and once we put this thing to bed, we don't have to worry about it anymore? Or what are your thoughts around that?
Frank, for this particular webinar, I limited my research to insurance policies and left permafrost alone. No, I mean, there's lots of information out there that, that there's certainly potential for more viruses like this. We've seen it with SARS, with MERS, we've seen it with Ebola, and I think we're probably lucky that despite that this can be, you can get this virus so easily. It may not be quite as bad as some of those others. And you start to think about, well, what if we had the same level of contagion and the same ability to get this with something that's a whole lot worse? That's pretty scary stuff. But I think, going back to your discussion about risk management, things will change. The way we interact will change. And again, we're not here to talk about staying safe and that type of thing, but I just coughed, it's an allergy, into my hand. I looked at Rich, who's sitting across the table from me. I ran out of the room and I grabbed Purell and doused myself, and I think, that's something I never would have done even 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So, you think about those little things and how you expand that out to, from a risk management standpoint, how are we going to handle things going forward? Our speed decision making will change. So, whether this is a black swan or not, I think the bigger issue is how will this change the way we interact and the way we do business going forward.
I agree. I think it's going to put great demands, and I think it's a positive to put big demands on the insurance profession to elevate the conversation and put responsibilities on employers to engage in conversations around things that maybe they didn't want to think about because they're so overwhelmed with so many other challenges that they face every single day. The people on this phone, we are very, on this webinar, we are very empathetic to the challenges, and here's another one. And here's another one that we're likely going to need to talk about, and we're going to have to elevate the conversation around risk. We need to do that. As Tom mentioned, there are certain transformative events that occur that change us forever. 9/11 was one. The global economic crash was another. And I think this is going to go. I could move back from there, or this is likely going to change us forever. And in many ways, they're going to be really positive. So it's got a lot of challenges ahead. But this is likely one of those transformative events, much like 9/11, much like the global economic crash, that we'll never go back to the way we were before. So it's I just want to remind people they can hit that question box. I'm going to get ready here to turn this over to Rich, and Rich has some information that maybe literally less than 24 hours old. Rich, jump in, sir. We're going to pivot now to the health insurance, and you'll notice the asterisk on the screen. That's basically just an asterisk that says this is based on what we know right now. But Rich, go ahead and hit it, sir, and let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
All right. Yes, it's certainly been crazy times. But, under the direction of federal and state government, health insurance companies have moved very quickly and swiftly to help people access care and afford care, not to worry about the cost to get care they need. So some of the first things they've done is, and pretty much blanket across, I won't say all plans, you have to check with your plan, but co-pays, employee cost share have really been removed from any of the testing. They're waiving co-pays and deductibles on treatment for COVID-19. They're waiving, many of the carriers are waiving co-pays on telehealth. They're expanding their staff to, be able to, get all the calls. There are many people using telehealth, so the staffing has been increased to try to serve all those people. Many of the carriers are relaxing their refill rules so people can get prescriptions earlier. And that's really to reduce the number of times somebody has to go to the drugstore to pick up a prescription. You can pick up 30-day refills a little bit earlier than before. Some of the carriers are relaxing rules on prior authorizations and referrals when someone has an HMO to get care for the coronavirus. You can flip to the next slide, Frank.
Sure. I think you hit that one. So
I hit that one.
Keep going. Yep.
All right.
I'm going to jump in here for 1 second, Frank, too.
Yes, sir.
Getting back to, I want to encourage everybody to talk to your broker about your existing plan. Rich mentioned the reduction or elimination of copays and deductibles. Numbers of carriers have come out and made statements. I think every carrier has pretty much removed the cost of testing, and it's really because they're going to get the backing of the federal government. Some companies have not done anything to remove their copays and deductibles from the treatment side of this. So I don't want people walking away thinking, okay, that this is going to be covered, and our employees will have no impact. As of now, there are some companies that have left those copays and deductibles in there. This is one of those things I think will change and evolve over the next, it could be hours, could be days, and maybe weeks, but with any of this, the caveat is talk to your broker, get a handle on what your insurance company is doing.
Yeah, definitely, Tom. Every insurance provider is, changing their policies as we speak. So check with your plan, check with your insurance carrier. So next, the big unknown, and I like your slide that said maybe, Frank, because
right.
These are things that the federal and state government are working on. They're part of the law that is trying to be passed. The president, it's going to be on the president's desk to sign and review. That the law is called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And the employment attorneys are going to have to dig in tonight, to decipher what exactly the language of the law will provide American public. But these are some of the things that are going to be addressed in the law. And we're seeing this at state levels and federal levels. Unemployment benefits are being expanded. Massachusetts announced last night that they were waiving the 1-week waiting period. Again, more to come. The possibility of expansion of FMLA to make coronavirus fall under the FMLA guidelines, and even loosening some of the FMLA guidelines. Extended sick pay. State and federal government are all looking at extending sick pay, so to try to prevent layoffs. I can flip the next one. Now, how are we going to pay for these things? They're, again, in the works of trying to figure out tax credits to reimburse employers for the cost of these expanded benefits. They're also looking at loans to keep small companies in operation and in existence. If people listen to the president, it's very important to keep these small businesses liquid so they can open back up when this is over. And obviously, employees in different industries are affected much more. The hospitality industry, we all saw what happened with cruise ships. They're all been grounded. So they are certainly looking at certain industries to help them even more. So when this is over, they'll come back strong. Couple things that weren't on slides that, again, it's evolving hourly. Part of the law was expanding Medicare, expanding food assistance programs, and they're also considering creating a special open enrollment period for people that are uninsured to pick up insurance during this time period. So again, the best advice I can give is keep up to date with the news, check our website, stay in contact with your employment attorney, and these are uncharted waters. We have to stay in the news and be aware what's going on.
Rich, just to kind of tie a bow on this with your part of the presentation, you and I had a conversation the other day about preparation for this, and one of the things we talked about is health insurance is likely going to get tapped by a lot more people. We're going to have greater penetration into the health insurance plan, very likely that's going to happen. So it's incumbent upon employers to make certain that things are buttoned up. And one of the things that you and I have talked about for years that's challenging is if employers have folks on a no work status, on a leave of absence. We're not talking about sending people home to work, remote employees, but if they're on a no work status, maybe they've been furloughed. If not now, maybe down the road. Would you speak real quickly, give us 30 seconds to a minute, and then they can reach out if necessary, about some of the issues to be concerned about if employers are in a situation where they have to furlough employees that are on their health plan?
Yeah, certainly. That's certainly one of the biggest questions that I have, and I'm really waiting for the government to make a ruling on this. Because if you're not actively at work, language in the healthcare policy, deep inside the policy, is you're not eligible unless you're on a protected status. Protected status would traditionally be COBRA or a disability. So we're waiting for the government to decide if this is an approved leave. And that has really, got a lot of people just kind of the wait and see what they're going to do about this, because the traditional path would be you have to COBRA people if they're not working. And again, that's why I say keep an eye on the news and interpretation of the law, because that's going to be a big one. And who's going to pay for that coverage is also a big question.
So let me just make one comment before I hand it back to Tom to bring us on home and wrap it all up. First of all, I want to thank everybody once again. Feel free to hit the Q&A box if you like as we're winding things down. We're approaching that 50-minute mark, which is about the attention span. That's why shrinks only use a 50-minute hour, I believe, because people can't pay attention much longer than that. And that's going to be another thing that we didn't talk about, too, with your remote workforce. Folks, the mental health aspect of this is going to be really challenging. Tom talked about communication. There's a lot of folks that are not used to being isolated. There's a lot of extroverts out there that need people around them. So we may want to, really think about the mental health aspects of this challenge of maybe being isolated for the first time. Some folks are going to love it. They're more introverts and they're going to love it. Other folks, not so much. And let me make one last comment, too, before I hand it back to Tom. Folks, out of full disclosure, I am remunerated by FBinsure. They pay me. But they don't pay me enough to lie. And that costs a whole lot more money than they pay me. So to be direct, these are the highest level professionals in this business that you will likely meet. Many of you probably already know that, not only with knowledge, not only with the technical aspects, but the integrity and the trust. I encourage you, at a crisis like this, they will make you proud if you reach out to them. I know they're going to make all of us proud in this profession. This is a time for the profession to step up and rise to a much higher level at this time of crisis. This is what the profession is supposed to be all about. We may not cover everything as we've talked about, but access to intelligent, experienced, high level of trusted integrity people is what you pay for, and now it's time to call on them, and they don't pay me enough to lie and say that they're the people to do it for you, so I'm comfortable saying that. Tom, bring it on home, my friend.
Well, thank you, Frank. That was unexpected, and now I'm wondering, do we pay you enough? But, I think Frank hit on a point that it's a risk that I am greatly concerned about, certainly within our own organization, and then beyond that, societally, the risk of isolation and what does that actually do to our people And I don't have all the answers here. I can share what we've been doing, and you've heard me use the word communicate over and over and over again, and I firmly believe that it's going to be extremely important to maintain the culture of our organizations and to maintain the productivity of our organizations in a time like this. So give your people the opportunity to interact with other people in your organization. If you're in a leadership position, make sure you're checking in on your entire teams together. Make sure you're checking in on people individually. Give them the ability to interact via video. We need to see other people. We need to see human expression and see body language. It's going to be very important. I hope that this does not last very long, but as somebody that wants to keep 110 employees employed, we need to plan for longer than that. So, we need to think about what we need to do to keep our people healthy at this time. As Frank said, do reach out to us. Utilize our resource center. That resource center on our website was built for two reasons. One, we're getting so much information, and we wanted to filter it down to be able to give people the best and the most impactful without having to go to a number of different resources. Two, our teams are a bit strained right now. We're getting a lot from a lot of different angles, and if people can go there and get their answers and understand that we may not be able to get back to them right away, at least there's a resource available to them. Outside of that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. These are certainly
Tom, we do have a question.
Times.
Let me.
Sure.
I hate to interrupt,
Jump
but I just
in.
want to make sure we don't completely sign off because we invited. And Lacey asked the question. Lacey, I can unmute you just to make certain that I answer it properly. But I think it had to do with the compensability of work comp claim arising from the home. Heads up, Lacey. Here I'm unmuting you so we can actually talk. Lacey, did I get that right? You said in your question that it cut out a little bit. Are you concerned about if somebody gets hurt at home while working, that the claim would be covered or would not be covered? You're unmuted, Lacey. You want to hit me with that question?
Yeah, I was more or less just curious what would happen if, like you said, somebody were to walk down the stairs and fall while going to go get a glass of water while working from home. Is that something that is an actual concern of companies right now, or?
It is, and look, we've had remote workforces for quite a while with high-speed internet access, and there's a number of cases that have been working through the various work comp system and courts over time. There's a pretty famous one out there where a woman tripped over her dog while moving around her home in the course and scope. And that claim was actually denied. She filed a work comp claim, and it was denied. The work comp judge said, no, tripping over your dog is not normal to your business or to your work. There was another very horrific example where a woman actually answered her front door working from home and was assaulted. And she filed a work comp claim, and that one was also denied because that was not considered in the course and scope. So it's an area whereby the thing about workers' compensation, Lacey, and everybody else on the phone, it's state by state, it's case by case, it's judge by judge. We want to, as Tom mentioned earlier, we want to do our best to make certain that our employees are safe in their homes, preferably in ergonomically correct workstations, especially if this is going to go on for a while. OSHA has no interest in what goes on in the home. I think that they're taking the right approach. Is like, wow, we're not knocking on people's homes doors. They're basically saying that's between the employer and the employee. They're staying completely out of it. But we just need more case law. In this environment right now, I suspect people that file claims working remotely will find a more amenable judge because there's just so much going on right now. And you could hear from what you heard from Tom and Rich and even a couple of things that I mentioned. The legislatures, the state legislatures and the federal government are just looking to help all they can. And it's probably going to be very employee friendly. Does that mean we're going to have 24-hour work injury coverage for employees for a while? I don't want to believe that that's true, but we could be in a situation where for a period of time, unsupervised employees that get injured, may find compensation or may find it compensable, Lacey. So thank you for that question. Did that address it to your satisfaction?
It did. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you very kindly. Tom, I just wanted to make sure that we addressed that before we officially wrapped it up. I apologize for the interruption.
Oh, no problem. Do we have any other questions before we do wrap it up?
Let's give it one more moment. We don't have any just yet. Certainly the FB team will be available, and they are out there to be found. You're not going to have any trouble finding those folks. So, Tom, once again, why don't you land this plane? Bring it on home.
Again, thank you everybody for joining us. I know not everything we delivered today was concrete. I think everybody understands why. I think understanding is one of the greatest things we all need to practice right now, given the situation. Stay safe. Do what you can to keep your teams happy and keep them moving. As things change, we will continue to push out information. We will do our best to communicate because we think that's what is most important. I'm sure we'll be talking to many of you folks soon. Thank you all, and best of luck.